listening to Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast with your hosts, John and Darin.
Welcome to Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast. I'm your host, John, and I'm here with my co-host, Darin. And for today's episode, we are going to be discussing the second Black Sabbath album, Paranoid. Released in September of 1970, Paranoid would go on to be one of the best-selling Black Sabbath albums and would contain some of their most recognizable songs like War Pigs, the title track, and Iron Man. So Darin, what are your early memories of hearing Paranoid for the first time?
Well, the first song I heard was Paranoid, title track. And we've talked about this before. This wasn't my first Black Sabbath album, but it was the album that made me a fan. And the reason why, well, it was the first two songs. War Pigs and then Paranoid is probably the ultimate 1-2 punch on any rock record. It's definitely my favorite. And, so this was basically the album that made me a Black Sabbath fan. The first album that I heard was Never Say Die. And like we talked about before, wasn't really what I hoped it would be when I heard it. I was expecting something a lot heavier. It really wasn't. And we all know what Never Say Die sounds like, and we'll get to that later on in the podcast. But basically, Paranoid was the album that was what I had hoped Black Sabbath would sound like. And my first impression was just basically being blown away. And to this day, this song Paranoid is probably one of my all-time favorite songs. It's one of those songs that I can always listen to. If it comes on the radio, I'm not going to turn it off. Over time, War Pigs there was a time when I had probably heard it enough, but it runs in cycles. And I think at this point, every time I hear it on the radio, I'm inclined to listen to it all the way through. But Black Sabbath Paranoid is probably one of the reasons why I'm into the music that I'm into. It really it was the second plateau for me as far as music goes. First plateau was Kiss, and that took me from about 76 to 79, 78, 79, and then from 79, 80, everything was just built on Black Sabbath. And Paranoid was the album that really did that.
Yeah. It was an interesting how this was I was thinking of this today. It's the only Black Sabbath album when I was getting them early on that I heard a bunch of the songs before I bought it. Because as we all know, this is the album that has the most songs to get radio airplay. And so I used to listen to this radio station, Rock 107, shout out to Scranton, Pennsylvania, that used to do rock blocks they called them rock blocks, where at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, they would pick an artist, play 3 songs in a row from that artist. And they used to always play War Pigs, Paranoid, Iron Man. Those were the 3 main ones. Sometimes you got Fairies Wear Boots, and maybe they would throw in, for something not from that album, Children of the Grave. And that was, so I used to record the show. And so before I even got the album, I had already heard 4 of the songs. And with Master of Reality, I had heard Children of the Grave before I got that. But when I got the first Black Sabbath album, or Volume 4, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, I hadn't heard any of the songs on those albums before I got them. But with Paranoid, I had heard these songs from the radio. So for me, it was about I knew that there were other songs on the record, of course, and it was about hearing okay, boy, I wonder what Planet Caravan sounds like. I wonder what Hand of Doom sounds like. I wonder what Rat Salad. I remember being obsessed with like, but what Rat Salad? What could that be about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the song, but I think at the time I was expecting like, man, what is this going to be
I, I don't even think they know what the derivation of that was either.
I was expecting lyrics in it, and I didn't even, I didn't get, so I was like, what are the lyrics in Rat Salad going to be about? So when I got Paranoid, which I borrowed it from a friend who had an older brother that had it, and I brought it home and I taped it for myself. I was already I well knew War Pigs, Paranoid, Iron Man, Fairies Wear Boots. It was just sort of filling in the dots and hearing them in the order that they were intended for on the album, and seeing the album cover. It sounds crazy. This is way before the internet, so I didn't even know what the album cover looked like. I was just hearing this on the radio. I had just gotten like you, I was into Kiss in the late 70s, but I didn't really go full throttle into hard rock and heavy metal till I heard AC/DC in 1980. And it was right around pretty much that exact same time that I started hearing Black Sabbath. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is different than AC/DC, but I really love this. And I had to get all their albums as quickly as I could. And
Yeah, that's
Paranoid was the first one. And even to this day, it's like you mentioned, if I added it up, I've heard the songs on Paranoid more than I've heard any other Black Sabbath songs, probably, especially with the radio airplay that they get and the fact that they play a lot of those songs live. But I don't turn it off when it comes on the radio. Just the other day, I listened to Paranoid from top to bottom, and I get just as much enjoyment out of it today as I did back then. It's a great sounding album. Every song is great on it. The production is great. The songs are fantastic, and it still works for me. It is certainly a top 5, top 3 metal album of all time for me. It's a top 3 album of in my personal musical life. It's just a fantastic album. It has aged magnificently, and it never gets old for me. I can still listen to it. And just the other day, went for my morning walk, and I was listening to it, and I was noticing some things that I just had never noticed before. And I've listened to this album probably thousands of times, and there's still, every time I listen to it, I still get something from it. So
Yeah, same here. Every time I listen to it, I enjoy it. And this is the album that I would say, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I've never heard Black Sabbath before, what album should I start with? I would say Paranoid. And the reason is because there's such a variety on the album. We have like going from War Pigs and, the sound of that to the more faster tempo, shorter Paranoid, and then Planet Caravan, which is really kind of psychedelic and spacey, and then Iron Man, which is sort of, like one of the all-time heavy metal anthems, next to probably Godzilla. And I think Godzilla by Blue Oyster Cult was sort of in response to Iron Man, if the story is told accurately. But it's just one of those albums that I think, if I was going to recommend a place for somebody who was interested in Black Sabbath to start, it would be Paranoid. It's just solid, and it would be weird if somebody hadn't heard these songs, because it's a staple of classic rock radio. It's a heavy metal album. The songs have been everywhere. Even in the Marvel movie Iron Man, at the very end, I think, while the credits were rolling, they play
Yeah.
Iron Man.
It's
Yeah.
funny, when I saw that movie, I was like, well, they're gonna use this Sabbath song Iron Man, right? And I'm watching the movie, and I expected it maybe in the scene where he comes out of the cave for the first time in an Iron Man costume. And I'm like, okay, they're gonna do it, right? No, they don't. And then finally at the end of the movie, he does the at the press conference, I'm Tony Stark and I am Iron Man. And then it kicks in.
Yeah.
It's just classic. I mean, it's iconic. My kids, my parents recognize that song. It's something you hear at sports stadiums. It's sort of it's one of those songs that it defines heavy metal. It sort of transcends time. Everybody, whether they know it or not, has heard that song, probably heard Paranoid also. So, and you're right, it does it. I think the album we talked about with the first album on the last podcast episode, that they were maybe still searching for their sound a little bit. They were still had some remnants of their days as a blues band with the covers and everything like that. But on Paranoid, for me, which is amazing because Paranoid came out in the same year as the first album. It only came out like 6-8 months later, which is just incredible that bands back then, you could release two incredible albums that close to each other. But to me, Paranoid, it's just when it all comes together for them, and when the Black Sabbath sound is really there. It touches off all the boxes. You've got the heavy, doomy riffs of the song Iron Man or Hand of Doom. You've got the swingy grooviness of Fairies Wear Boots and Rat Salad. You've got the big epic-y type thing in War Pigs. You've got the trippy Planet Caravan. Geezer's lyrics are in full display with the war theme, War Pigs, Hand of Doom, environmental topics like Electric Funeral and spacey, trippy Planet Caravan. It's just, it all comes together on this record.
I think it was really a collaborative album too. I think everybody really contributed, probably more so in doing some research for this episode. I came across some various sources, and they talk about everyone's contribution. And Ozzy was really a big contributor to this album too, especially with the vocal melodies. And we'll get into it on the track by track thing, but I think Planet Caravan was pretty much his concept lyrically. I don't think Geezer did much to those lyrics. I think that was pretty much Ozzy. And,
as was Fairies Wear Boots, if I remember. I think that Ozzy may have written all of those lyrics on Fairies Wear Boots, right? Or if he didn't, he had a big part in it.
Ozzy would come in on at least half the album, Ozzy would come in with a concept, and that's what he would riff off of. And some of the lyrics wouldn't necessarily make sense, and some of them were sort of a little bit, bad English. So they would basically record it, and then Geezer and Ozzy, and probably Bill too, would go over, but predominantly Geezer would go over and fine-tune the lyrics and make them cohesive. But oftentimes it would sort of go off of what Ozzy came up with.
If you listen to for the people out there that maybe if they haven't heard this, I encourage you to there's deluxe remastered versions of the early albums, and for the Paranoid album, there's a bonus disc that you can hear early versions of Paranoid where Ozzy is like Darin just said, riffing on the lyrics. He's just sort of making lyrics up on the spot, and you hear certain words here and there that ended up in the final song, which sort of illustrates how they sort of operated back then. Tony Iommi would have a riff, they would jam around on it. Ozzy would sing a melody line, kind of making up gibberish style words. Couple phrases or lines here and there would stick. There'd be a title or something, and Geezer would sit down and flesh out the lyrics, and they would have a song.
Yeah, I mean, Ozzy was just as much of a musician as anybody else in the band, he used his voice as an instrument. While Tony was playing guitar, Bill was figuring out what tempo to play, what beat to play. Geezer was working on bass lines. Ozzy was riffing with his voice, and that's how they jammed. And I don't think anybody necessarily. Well, I mean, okay, so with this album, basically, and this is one of the most amazing things about this album to me, and I just discovered this in the course of like looking up some little factoids about it to discuss for this episode. But this album was predominantly written while they were on tour for 6 weeks during their tour to support the first album. It was written moving, in the van from show to show. Some of it was actually written on stage. The way that they performed Warning on that tour, there was a section that basically spawned War Pigs. And when they went into the studio, they remembered that jam and, applied that and basically built a song around it. So, when you think about it, it was pretty much the same sort of a thing as the first album, where it was all just an extension of a live set, and it was very organic. It wasn't as though they were separated and reconvened and then said, well, what do you got? Well, I've got this riff, and well, I've got these lyrics, or I've got this melody to put to that. I mean, it was all jammed out, live situation, all, basically them working together, either in a van or in a room or on a stage. So I think that's pretty cool. But what I thought was kind of amazing about it was the short amount of time that all this came together. 6 weeks is a really short time to put out an album that went on to make the impact that this did.
Yeah, and I was just thinking in my head that Paris 70 video, was that recorded before or after Paranoid came out?
Oh, it was definitely recorded after, because Paranoid wasn't written prior to them going in the studio. The song Paranoid, that was
right.
Well, they had some extra time, and I don't know if it was Tom Allum or it was Roger Bain that said, okay,
the record label needed them to fill out. They needed another song for the record label, another 3 to 4 minutes. And they just wrote that on the spot, basically.
Well, the rest of the band, Tony stayed in the studio and was basically trying to figure something out, and the rest of the band went out to get lunch, and when they came back, Tony said, "Oh, check this out." And then they all just, liked it. It sounded cool, and they built a song around his riff in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, because there's some, you can hear some versions of War Pigs with the different lyrics, and that's why it was making me think, because I think at the Paris 70 show, he sings those different lyrics. Does he?
Yeah, he does. I think he mixes them both up, but I think that's probably because, Ozzy would oftentimes forget lyrics. And I think the original lyrics, the original version of War Pigs was called Walpurgis. And the record label rejected it because they thought it was too satanic. So they went back to the drawing board and they tweaked the lyrics. Geezer wrote basically, he kept with the same basic theme, but took some of the more evil imagery out and replaced it with more of a political. It became more of a protest song than a, Black Sabbath, the song part 2 sort of thing, which I think it was more or less originally conceived to be. So those lyrics I think were established. Well, they were established before the version that ended up on the album, and it's most likely, if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that Ozzy probably committed those early lyrics more to memory than the new lyrics. And I'm going to say, we'd have to look and see when the date of that show. Do you know offhand what the date of that show was? I know that the album was released in September 18th, 1970. I think that show was in September.
That's why, because it doesn't they say in December 20th. December 20th. I'm looking right now. Okay. So it was right after, a month or two after the album the album had come out, because I thought they even say like, this is from our new album, and I know, yeah, he did like make references to the Paranoid album. So yeah, I guess that show was just a month or two after the album had been released.
Had been recorded, because it was released on September 18th, and you said that show was on September 20th. That was
December.
Oh, December. Okay.
December 20th.
Yeah, a couple months later. Yeah, so everything was really, really new. Yeah. That's probably what happened. He was just probably singing the old songs, because those were the established lyrics. And the record company was like, yeah, but no.
Yeah, because there's a few different versions you can hear of him singing those lyrics. There's those John Peel sessions. There's that, I think it's from Germany, that video that came out not too long ago, where there's just a little clip of them. They're outside somewhere playing War Pigs in the big open air, like amphitheater type thing. And he sings the different lyrics on that. So yeah, I'm guessing that, like you said, they probably had those and then changed them, I think, for the better. I like the lyrics that are on the album.
Yeah, and when we talked about the last album, the first Black Sabbath album, you had asked about that, and I said it was probably Ozzy just riffing. But then after I thought about it, I remember that there was an early version of War Pigs that was called Walpurgis. And I think I referenced the different title, but I wasn't sure what lyrics were really established in the early working version of that. It seems that consistently when those alternate lyrics were sang or sung, that they were pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Eating dead rats' innards.
Yeah. See them eating dead rats' innards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I would respect a Black Sabbath tribute band if they did War Pigs and they sang the original Walpurgis lyrics.
That would be cool. I'd get behind that.
Yeah. I also got to say, I'm gonna go back on something that I said on the previous podcast, where I said that I thought that maybe the first Black Sabbath album had Bill Ward's best drum sound, but nah, I think the drum sound on Paranoid is probably his best drum sound. And I'll even go a step further and say that this might be his best drumming in Black Sabbath is on the Paranoid album. What say you as a drummer?
Well, he definitely is. Rat Salad, man, that's
that's his Moby Dick or his
Toad. Is Moby Dick, but it's just, you can just tell that it's completely improv. There was no phrasing that went into that. I don't think he had any. I think that was completely off the cuff. And technically it's not really good, but it's great in what it is, which is, there's a lot
energy.
It's
got a lot of energy.
A lot of energy, a lot of spirit, and very live sounding. So, yeah, I mean, the thing that bothers me, though, about the drums on Paranoid is they're so closely mic'd. And there's a couple times, and most people probably don't even notice it, but some people probably do. Bill hits the mic more than a couple times. But the thing is, they're so closely. I get the impression, I don't know what the studio notes are, but I get the impression there's a close mic to the top of the head, and there might even be a mic inside the drum. Maybe
they definitely have a very upfront, I wouldn't say completely dry, but they're definitely really sort of,
and they sound
close sounding.
Yeah, and they sound really out of tune too. And I know I was curious what he's actually playing, what his drum set is on that session, and I know that he's playing a 12-inch rack tom, which kind of gives it that really high end sound. It's almost a little wonky, that rack tom when he goes from the snare to the rack tom, and especially you notice it especially in Rat Salad because he's playing the entire kit. So there's a lot of contrast between his rack tom and his floor tom and the sound of his snares. He has a really nice snare drum sound. But overall, yeah, I mean his drumming is fantastic. The the breakaway part in Electric Funeral, really jazzy. A
Yeah.
lot of finesse in that. I don't think there were too many other rock drummers playing that sort of a thing.
Not in that heavy of a context
No,
for
no.
sure. And the same thing
And,
in Fairies Wear Boots. That song just has a swing to it. Boom, ba, ba, boom, ba, boom,
yeah.
da, 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 ba. And the way him and Geezer just swing in that song. I mean, to me, that's really like the formula, the Black Sabbath formula that a lot of people don't get is their blues and jazz influence and the way that comes through. And so even in War Pigs, that's like a triple meter thing. It has like a
Mhm.
kind of a swing to it
Oh,
in
it
the
definitely
beginning.
does. Yeah.
And when the hi-hat thing comes in the verses, Fairies Wear Boots especially, to me, is just all about sort of that groove between Bill and Geezer. And that, to me, is sort of the secret sauce, if you will, to Black Sabbath, and
Yeah. Oh,
is
definitely.
their jazz and blues rhythmic feel and influence. And even Rick Rubin, I saw him allude to that in interviews where he talked about when he first got them together, what he talked to them about was jazz and blues, and because that's where they were coming from in those early days. They weren't thinking metal. Where when you get into Sabbath in the 90s and late 80s, they're a little bit more of they don't have quite as much of a swing to the playing at that point in their career. But here early on, it's the first album, the second album, it's all over it, that blues and jazz influence. And I think Rick Rubin really honed in on that and was like, okay, guys, this is where the headspace to get back into this self-titled paranoid master of reality headspace. You got to think about and listen to some of those old blues records, some of those old jazz records you guys used to listen to, because really that's where they were coming from. And
Yeah.
they just made it then. So you've got the swing of Geezer and Bill, and then you put in that heavy, thick guitar sound of Tony Iommi and his minor key riffs, and then you put Ozzy's unique voice on top of it. That is the equation how you form Black Sabbath. You take any of those elements out, and it's not gonna sound the same.
No, but the thing that's really cool about Black Sabbath is the rhythm section. It's so fluid. It's not stiff. You could say, well, Geezer and Bill Ward lock in so tight, but they're still really fluid. There's a lot of finesse with Bill's playing. You can just hear that he's practically, he's dancing while he's playing. He's
Oh yeah, his drum
reacting.
fills and War
Yeah,
Pigs and Fairies Wear Boots are just great.
he's reacting to the music. He's feeling it. He's in the moment, and likewise, so is Geezer. He's not just following the guitar riff. He's all over the place.
Yeah,
But it still the two of them really lock in and build this solid foundation that allows Tony to just create those massive riffs and his solos. His solos are really interesting and kind of free-form jazzy in their own right too.
yeah. I always think of that change in Iron Man when they're coming out of the bum 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 ba da 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 bum bum ba da da ba da da.
Yeah.
It's like this gear shift, but they just land on it just like they're
Yeah.
all one mind. They just spot. It is just spot on, and it's just a sign of a band who had just had a lot of gigs under their belt, were totally gelled with each other. They just locked in with each other. There's a special chemistry amongst those four guys that I love all eras of Black Sabbath, but there is certainly a unique chemistry when the four original guys are together. And on this album, they're just firing on all cylinders. They're young, they're hungry, they're their chops are together. The band is super tight. It's just a lot of
Yeah.
forward momentum in their career. It's just it's all clicking for me for them at this point in their career.
It's just solid jamming, it's pretty much what it is. You get a band that's been playing for the amount of time that they have, put them in the studio, and that part that you referenced in Iron Man, that lock in, ba 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 boom boom, come in so tight, everybody on the same page, one take. That's pretty amazing. And it's funny because I was watching some time ago. I was watching classic albums, and they
Yeah.
had the Paranoid thing, and Henry Rollins basically said the same exact thing you did. He's like,
Yeah.
that change, it's like brilliant. It's like, wow. And he's right. It's like, you don't really realize it. I mean, when you're listening to it, and if you're not in a band, it's not that it's exclusive, but you appreciate it more if you are in a band, because you know how difficult it is for everybody to reach an agreement and be on time and that tight with that sort of a downshift. And you really appreciate it more if you've been in a band, or if you even jam with people. You know how hard it is to get that to just lock in like that.
Absolutely.
But,
Well, I do remember, though, when I first got the record, being a little puzzled by the album cover. I remember thinking, is that okay? What is this? As a young kid, I wasn't 100% sure what the word paranoid meant, and we all learned the story later on that the album was originally intended to be called War Pigs, and so some dude running around in the forest with a fluorescent sword and a shield would have made more sense with the title War Pigs. But I remember when I got the record, I was just like, what is going on here? And I remember thinking, is that Tony Iommi, the guy with the sword? I just remember not having any idea what it meant. And I remember not knowing what the word paranoid even meant. I remember thinking like it was some sort of like, you're going crazy, which I guess it is to a degree, but I thought it was, I don't know. I had no idea what the word paranoid meant. And I remember thinking like, maybe it has something to do with like this album cover. And it's an interesting cover.
I think I've seen and read Geezer explaining that a couple times, and he said, yeah, we just like the word paranoid. It's not, doesn't really
because
have
the lyrics in the
do.
song don't really, it's more about a depressed guy breaking up with his girlfriend. It doesn't have really anything to do with the definition of paranoid, but yeah, the word just sounds cool. So,
and the lyrics, whenever there's lyrics like that, what's funny about it is the lyrics in Paranoid aren't that different from the lyrics in the song A Loner on 13. And it really shows, well, first of all, I think that's an extension of, based on some of the evidence that I've compiled, that's largely an extension of Geezer's personality. He was sort of that kid that was sort of introverted and a little withdrawn from society, went more inside of his own head, kind of had the maybe misconception from the people from the outside world that he was sort of unhappy, when in reality he was just sort of figuring things out. And it's funny because as song Paranoid, the lyrics were written as Geezer is a young man, relatively speaking, and then fast forward to 13, which came out about 7 years ago or so, as an older man, and there's not a whole lot of difference between them. But I think that whole introverted, introspective lyric theme is largely Geezer's influence on the music of Black Sabbath.
Sure. They found the girl who was the model on the cover of the first Black Sabbath album after 50 years. They finally found out who she was about a year ago. Now they got to find out who the guy was on the cover with the sword and the shield.
Yeah. People have suspected that it's Tony Iommi, but I've never heard anything to validate that.
Yeah,
it would be interesting to see. He's, probably wouldn't even recognize him now.
That's going to have to be my next for this Halloween. Maybe that should be my Halloween
That
costume.
would be cool. That would be cool. I never thought of that. I wonder how many people would recognize you. Oh, man, you're the guy from the Black Sabbath album cover. Yeah.
Yeah, but for those people that would recognize it, it would totally be. My mind would be blown if I was out somewhere and I saw somebody on Halloween dressed like that. I would just be floored. So,
Yeah, I would think that would be really cool.
all right. Well, let's talk about the songs on the record. We've sort of talked a little bit about some
Yeah,
of
we
them
got
already,
another one.
but so War Pigs. What did you think the
So
first time you heard War Pigs?
Ozzy's voice was the first thing that struck me, and in fact, I think the thing that resonates the most with me on this album. I mean, I love the guitar playing. I love the very audible bass. I love Bill Ward's drums. I love everything about the album. But the thing that really resonated with me the most was Ozzy's voice. The way that he sings those verses, those lines, just comes through so authoritative. He's so above the mix, and in my mind, when I was listening to the album for the first time, I just could see this, and it was largely aided by the picture of the band inside the gatefold, where the camera's sort of looking up. You know, the standing. We all know the picture where they're standing in the field, the camera's sort of looking up at them all. And whenever I listen to Paranoid, in fact, when I still listen to War Pigs, that's the image of Ozzy. When I'm listening to Ozzy's voice, I see that image of him, and you're looking up at him like he's standing up, you know, on top of a mountain, and he's singing these lyrics down to everybody. It carries a lot of authority, and I think that's really cool. And I don't know that there's anybody that to this. Well, there's a lot of imitators, people that have tried to sound like Black Sabbath, but I think they were pretty much peerless when it came to those vocals, Ozzy's vocals, and it was the one thing that really appealed to me the most. So my first impression was definitely the vocal sound of Ozzy's voice in that. The
Oh yeah.
music, riffs, everything else was so cool, but what really caught my attention, what really just made me really get into it, was Ozzy's voice.
Yeah, and the whole start stop, the way it stops and the hi
Yeah.
hat underneath, and Ozzy singing over that is just great. And I remember uh, as a Catholic school kid, you know, the Satan laughing spreads his wings line, and
Yeah.
there was a kid I remember in my class in grade school, Catholic school, and he had written on his religion book. You used to have those brown bag covers on your
Yeah.
cool
I
books, and he had written "Satan laughing spreads his wings." You know, that's just so awesome. And the opening chord of that song it is just such a heavy song. It is, and it's not like Iommi is playing a lot, but just him holding out that chord. And one really cool thing I noticed when I was listening to it the other day that I never really noticed before, and I guess it's just a way they mixed it, where he hits that opening chord and it feeds back a little bit, and the guitar is in the right channel, but the feedback is in the left channel, which is, oh, it's just awesome. And that chord, his guitar sound, it's so thick. I remember when I saw them in Camden, and they opened with that song, and there was a curtain covering the stage before blocking the stage before they came on, and they had big screens over the top, and they were showing images, slow motion images of Vietnam era helicopters,
Oh yeah, okay.
sort of flying towards you, right? So it was making that like whoa 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 sound, you know, and the helicopters were coming closer, and the curtain dropped, and it was timed absolutely perfectly where that first chord hit right when the curtain hit the ground. And I swear to you, it was the heaviest thing I ever heard in my life. I thought the earth was going to open up. I thought that it was just it one chord. It is, and I can still listen to that today. And when that first chord kicks in, because there's this little bit of a millisecond like where it just comes in, and it is just so heavy. It's so classic, and it has one of my favorite Iommi guitar solos. It's Iommi at his best when his guitar solos are are riffs unto themselves. And it's
Yeah.
that part at the end where everybody sings, everybody in the crowd always sings along when you get
Oh, yeah.
there. The dum, bum, bum, ba, da, da. Leading up to that part is every time, I'm getting shivers up my spine thinking about it now. When that part kicks in right there, that is just so epic. It is so cool. That is a song that you hear when you're getting ready, when you go to a concert. Doesn't matter what kind of metal show it is, a death metal show, black metal show, whatever. How often do you hear that song get played over the PA system while you're waiting for the band to come on? And everybody in the crowd just sings along with it. That riff kicks in. It is just classic. It's Iommi at its best. It's the band at its best. The whole guitar solo thing with Geezer going nuts underneath them, playing like all that fast lines, and they're just jamming out really hard in the middle section, and then it drops back down, and Ozzy's like voice comes back in, man. Is it? Oh Lord, yeah. That's just the whole thing.
It probably is the quintessential Black Sabbath song. It's one of those songs you can hear at a ball game. You can hear it at any heavy metal or rock concert. It's just, it transcends different things. It just one of those songs. It's completely iconic, and I think it's probably, when you're talking about Black Sabbath, and even like a casual person who's casually familiar with the band would probably say, "Oh yeah, the band that does that. What's the name of that song? War Pigs." It's a classic song, and for pretty much the reasons you're talking about. It's very emotive. I mean, there's so many different things going on in it. It really it reaches inside, pulls out a lot of emotion, not only from the lyrical subject matter, but from the way that the music sounds. The different things. You don't even have to listen to the lyrics. You just hear the voice as an instrument, the wailing, the way that Ozzy's almost like he's like on the brink of just like despair, which is kind of like the Ozzy sound and most of what he was singing at this time. But the heavy guitar riff that wasn't so much aggressive, just very dense. It's an incredibly effective song. And that concert that you're talking about, I remember that. That curtain and the war scenes, and I think that I'm going to say that was, you said it was in Camden. I'm going to say, was that 2001 when Bill Ward rejoined?
Yeah,
okay.
Bill Ward was in the band, and that's when Rob Halford sang. Ozzy didn't sing that night.
Okay, then I didn't. Then I guess I didn't see that, because I know that I saw them.
At least I think it was. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe that was another time. But I know I was in Camden. I think it was one of the Ozfests. I think they were headlining one of the Ozfests.
But I remember that Ozzy and Bill, it was all, there were 4 original members. I remember going to that and just like losing my mind. I was so into it. I was like dancing around. It was like, it was amazing. It was like, this is Black Sabbath. This is, the moment that I had been waiting for a long time.
Yeah.
Was the original Black Sabbath. And they sounded great. I mean, you could say what you want about Ozzy. And maybe, I don't know if I've ever heard a bootleg version of that show. I probably have it here somewhere, but caught up in the moment, listening to it as it was happening, sounded fantastic. Everybody was just completely on point. I love that kind. Yeah.
All right. Oh, and let's I want to also shout out to Bill's amazing drum fills and the ba-da go 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 ga 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 da ba ba da. It's just great, man. His drums all over that when that section kicks in the song. It's just everybody shines in that song. Everybody has moments in that song where they shine.
If I had to describe Bill Ward's playing to somebody, I would say he's a cross between John Bonham and Keith Moon. I would say he would be in the middle, with John Bonham on one end and Keith Moon on the other. Keith Moon so just spastic, and Bonham so controlled and heavy and dense. You put Bill Ward in the middle, he has attributes of both rolled into one. He's got sort of that spastic reactionary style of Keith Moon, but he also has that rock solid, dense, big kick drum sound, heavy fills, same as Bonham. So, I mean, if you're a fan of either, or both, Keith Moon and John Bonham, and Bill Ward's your guy. It's the
For sure.
best of both in one drummer, I think.
All right, then it moves into probably their biggest song, "Paranoid," the title track.
Yeah, amazing.
What can you say about this? It's just 3.5 minutes. What is it? I think it's under 4 minutes. It's pretty much.
Yeah. I'm going to say it's probably my favorite song of all time. I would have to, if somebody's, it's such a hard question to answer. What's your favorite song? Oh my God. There's so many songs that I love, so many groups I love, so many albums that I have. But song for song, man, I mean, I think Paranoid just hits all the main places for me. It's got the cool riff.
Yeah.
It's got the tempo that it's a driving tempo. I love Ozzy's voice. I mean, I think that's just his best song. I love that slapback echo that's going on. It's subtle, but it's there. You hear it. It's just in the way that it combines with the tone of his voice and that riff and everything, man, just comes together. And it's just such an incredible song. It's probably my favorite, not just my favorite Black Sabbath song, probably my favorite song of all time.
For sure, it's definitely legendary, and even though it's the song that they always play live, it's a song that Ozzy always plays live. And even though when you're there at the show and it kicks in, you're digging it. And I remember I saw them when I first moved here to Tampa, and there was a kid, like a 13, 14-year-old kid, standing in front of me, and he was getting into the entire show. And when they came out for the encore, they did Paranoid, and the kid just went crazy. He was air guitaring, he was going nuts, and he turned around and he looked at me and he went, "This is my favorite song. I was hoping they were going to play it."
I love it out.
And I thought, how cool is that? Like, this kid had probably just heard this album for the first time like a year ago or something, and this is like,
wow, his
first concert, his favorite song. He can't wait to hear it. And yeah, it's just it's a great song. And you're right, Ozzy's. I love the "Can you help me occupy my brain?" Yeah, that part, and just the driving, chugging rhythm, which is such a heavy metal standard thing nowadays. Back then, it's so tight. Bill's in real tight on the drums. It's just got a cool driving rhythm to it. And Iommi's kind of weird, fuzzed out guitar solo. He's got like that effect on his guitar, that string effect. It just adds to the sort of weirdness of the subject matter. And
they did a couple of videos for this song too. One was I guess it was that Beat Club video where they have the green screen and there's that big mannequin head in the background, and Ozzy's wearing that leather jacket. It's a little bit too small, and these are, they got the orange amps, and there's like that shag carpet drum riser thing, if memory serves. There's that's a full color video. And then there's another one that it's also, I think it's from Germany or something, but it has like, it's black and white and has that spiral background that keeps spinning while they're playing. But both videos are really cool, and this has really enhanced that song visually. It's interesting to note, this is one of two songs on this particular album that the lyrics are often misquoted. The first is, to backtrack a little bit, with Paranoid, when you were mentioning the guy in your class that had "Satan laughing spreads his wings," that's actually a lyric. But in the same song, I remember there's some confusion. People thought that end of God has struck the hour. It was, people thought that was the lyric. I remember my uncle was kind of put off by Black Sabbath. He and I, he's only a few years older than I am, and we got that album and we both really liked it. We listened to it, and then I caught up with him a couple weeks later, and he was giving it to me, his copy of it, which I already had my own. He's like, "Here, you can have this." I said, "What? You don't want this?" No. It's anti-religion. It's anti-God. It's End of God is. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, that line where he says, end of God has struck the hour. And I said, I don't think he says that. It doesn't sound like that to me. And of course, I went and I saw a music book at the music store that I think it was for, we sold our souls for rock and roll, and it had, War Pigs was in that. And of course, it had all the music, but then underneath the bars of music, it had the lyrics.
Yeah.
And I went and I checked that out, and it said, and as God has struck the hour, which is a little awkward, but when you listen to it, you can, that's what it sounds like he's singing, but it does, it's easily misinterpreted or misheard. Then the other is in Paranoid, where Ozzy, where the lyrics are,
I tell you to
end
enjoy
your life. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's singing, and I tell you to enjoy life.
Right. And everybody thought it was, I tell you to end your life.
End your life, yeah.
And for those who younger people out there, in the 80s, when you had the whole satanic panic and people were sort of going crazy over song lyrics, I remember Ozzy was supposed to play somewhere near where I lived, and the show ended up getting canceled. But for weeks leading up to that, the editorial section of the newspaper just had some letter from an angry parent almost every day, and this is before social media, and that was one of the main, like, people kept bringing this up about that lyric in that song, telling kids to end their life. And it wasn't even the lyric, but this is what all these parents were hanging their hat on to try to show that this concert shouldn't happen in
Well, parents just don't understand.
DJ Jazzy, what was his name? The Fresh Prince.
Will Smith.
Yeah, he knew.
But no, parents were never. I mean, notoriously were always sort of, distance from what kids were listening to, and I think some of that served the whole dynamic in and of itself. Kids want something that's exclusively their own. It wouldn't quite have the same appeal if parents understood, if parents sanctioned it and said, okay, let's listen to some Black Sabbath, family time, let's sit down and listen to Black Sabbath. Kids want something that's their own, a little bit of a rebellion, maybe a lot of rebellion, depending. So there's always that contrast between what kids are listening to and what they're processing, and what parents are hearing and how they're processing it. And that's a good example. And I think there's a lot of authority that comes with when you're a teenager. You take a lot of authority from rock music, or or your so quote unquote idols have a lot more authority than your parents do at a certain age. And I think that intimidates parents. And certainly something that might carry a message like end your life, it would definitely send up some red flags. So I understand it, but what's unfortunate about it is that there is such a disconnect that parents would think that somebody would tell kids, would want kids to do that, would want their audience to take their own life, especially in that day and age. And of course, now things have gone way extreme, in probably the last 20, 30 years, so much so that there probably are lyrics where, certain extreme metal bands are telling kids to kill themselves. But, at that time, it wasn't that sort of a thing. I think that it was a call to arms for, especially the music of Black Sabbath, to jump ahead and talk about Children of the Grave. Black Sabbath's message was pretty much for there to be unity, for people to, try to change the world, and for the youth to lead the way. There was nothing about their music that was, it sounded kind of what could be considered evil. There really wasn't anything evil about their music. You look beneath the surface, and there was actually some positive messages going on, but they also were realistic, and there was quite a bit of protest going on too about what was going on around them. And you take into consideration where they were coming from, an industrial town where life was pretty bleak. basically you either worked in a factory or I don't know, you try to do something to get out of town. But in most cases, people probably just stayed where they were, worked in the factory, and that was the sum total of their existence. Black Sabbath were one of the rare situations where, you know, 4 guys actually made it out of Birmingham, England. And
Yeah, and it was the mystique and sort of the mystery around the band, the lyrics, the sort of dark overtones, the forbidden sound, forbidden fruit thing that it is. That's what attracts kids. I know me, as you hear me reference this, I be going to Catholic school and hearing stuff like this. I hadn't never heard anything like this before. My only other reference at this point was really AC/DC and Kiss, and this was clearly a lot darker, a lot heavier, a lot more intense. The subject matter, the song titles, the riffing, the minor key sounds. It was a different. It was a different experience than AC/DC or Kiss, and even though Kiss maybe had, some people felt they had sort of a dark image, but it wasn't like Black Sabbath. It wasn't the same as Black Sabbath.
No. And I love Kiss, especially early Kiss. But there was a lot of showbiz with Kiss. There was no showbiz with Black Sabbath. And I think that when we talk about what attracted us to the music as kids, I think it's also important to keep in mind that they weren't really that old when they were making this music. So this is what excited them. You know, Geezer was into the occult, you know, not necessarily Satanism or anything, but just, you know, otherworldly type things, and, you know, paranormal, supernatural stuff that excited him. And likewise, as far as some of the dark images, the realism, well, that was stuff that was going on in the world. And, you know, we're coming out of basically in the Summer of Love, where everybody was, and, you know, this gets referenced a lot in the history of Black Sabbath, where they were the antithesis of the hippie flower power generation. They were like saying, wait a minute, that's not what we're seeing. You know, that's not what's happening here. We're living with the threat of an atomic bomb possibly being dropped on us. You know, the Vietnam War was raging, and things were not happy, and they were reacting to that. So, you know, a lot of the darkness came from the reality of their surroundings, and some of the other more supernatural occult type things were just mainly just a youthful interest in things that were cool, you know, and maybe not part of the mainstream at that time. So I mean, these were young men creating music that they were excited by for basically more or less the same age group, you know. I mean,
Sure.
these weren't like 40-year-old men in suits trying to construct something that they thought the kids might be into. You know, it wasn't that, you know, disenfranchised from you know, they were part of the audience. They were playing music that they enjoyed, and they had an audience that appreciated it, that wasn't too much younger or even older than they were. So
Yeah. And then they shift gears into Planet Caravan.
right.
I remember when I first got on the internet and found the black-sabbath.com website. This is not the official Black Sabbath site. This is Joe Sigler's website, which has been on the internet for a very long time.
Yeah.
And one of the top frequently asked questions was, who is that singing Planet Caravan? Because at the time, there's that effect on Ozzy's voice. And I remember that being like one of those questions that Sabbath fans would argue about in the forum and talk about in the forum endlessly, because nobody knew at the time who that was. I remember a lot of people speculating it was Bill Ward, because
I thought it was Bill Ward. Yeah, I thought it was Bill Ward for the longest time, but it's that Leslie effect on Ozzy's voice that makes it sound different.
And going back to those deluxe remasters for everybody out there, you can hear a version of Planet Caravan with Ozzy singing different lyrics and without the effect on his voice, which is really interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a go ahead.
It's one of two songs that, and I it was just recently where I heard, and you're mentioning those remastered versions of the first, I think, what is it, 6 Black Sabbath albums, Master of Reality. To jump ahead a little bit for a second or two, Solitude was one I could have sworn was Bill Ward singing.
Yeah, that was the other one.
So
Yeah,
much like Bill Ward, but it's Ozzy. When you hear those outtakes and you hear it, just his isolated voice, it's like, yeah, that's Ozzy. Wow.
yeah. Yeah, and once you hear his voice, you can hear it then. You can hear it through the effect and everything. But it's a cool song. It's got a lot of weird little trippy things going on. There's that little, I guess it's like a synthesizer noise. There's a little acoustic piano going on in the background. Iommi's got a cool, showing his jazz influence, cool kind of clean guitar sound, jazzy solo thing in it. The hand drums and Geezer's ostinato repeated bass line and the spacey lyrics. It's a cool song that changes the mood a little bit of the record. And I remember that was one of the songs I hadn't heard on the radio. So I remember hearing that for the first time. I was like, wow, this is different. But I liked it. It was really, really cool. And I still like it. I think it sits perfectly on the album. I love the fact that Black Sabbath just doesn't do one thing. And what makes Black Sabbath heavy is that they can do a song like Planet Caravan, a trippy song like that, and it still sounds like them. It still sounds kind of dark, but it makes the other songs around it sound heavier because it's just such a gear change, sound change.
It's a great song, but what makes it great is where it falls in context in the album. It's really lush. It has a very really atmospheric, and it's a great bridge to Iron Man, because when Iron Man comes in and that guitar, that sick guitar, that
it's back to earth.
Such a good little, it almost lulls you into a false sense of security, like, oh, okay, everything's calmed down now. The album's almost, or the side's almost over. It's all going to be pretty peaceful. There's nothing heavy, and then it comes in with Iron Man. But interesting to note that with Iommi's playing, and I'm sure you know this too, that Django Reinhardt was a guitar player that Tony admired, especially after his accident where he lost the tips of his fingers. But Django Reinhardt was missing a couple fingers in an accident, and he was a really good guitar player, finger picking, stuff like that, and he was a big influence on Tony. And you can hear that sort of thing going on in Planet Caravan, that that really acoustic guitar,
jazzy phrasing and everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's flute, the sound effect I was thinking of earlier. I think that's a flute in there, which for those who don't know, Iommi plays flute, and I believe he plays it in there, and there's somewhere else. There's like one or two other, I think, Sabbath songs where I thought there was something else that he played flute on, but I don't remember.
Is it's something off of Master on this album or another album?
Well, I think in Planet Caravan, I think there's like there's those, what I thought was like an electric keyboard sound. I think there's like these flute, just sort of long held out little high notes that are being played from the flute. It sounds like there's an effect on it, but I think that it's a flute.
Yeah, it could be. I know Tom Allen gets credit for playing some piano on that song. I'm not sure in what capacity or if I even heard it, but maybe that could be what it is. Maybe it's like a mellotron or something.
Yeah, maybe. And then it leads into that bass drum kicks in.
Yeah.
and Iron Man, I mean, speaking of here was another thing, who's that at the beginning of Iron Man that affected the voice, the I am Iron Man part. And that was just, man, as a 10-year-old kid who was into comic books.
Oh yeah.
It didn't get any cooler than the beginning of that with that guitar.
That was pure pulp right there. That was pure pulp. Yeah.
and that super heavy riff. And we sort of talked about this one a lot earlier with the tempo changes and the jamming out section. It's got a great ending too. Reminds me a little bit of like the ending of the song Black Sabbath, the way the bass comes in on the and it's got that epic signature da 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 bum 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 ba da ba da da. It's just a great the way that song builds. It's just fantastic.
Yep, the really organic, the way that it builds up, and that ending, and just the way that it ends is perfect. It's like a crescendo to that finale.
And that was the thing about them at this time. Nothing that they did feels forced. There's a lot of different sections in these songs, but it doesn't sound forced. You hear too many bands nowadays where it sounds like things are cut and pasted in, and it's just awkward changes. But for them, there's really a lot of different things going on, a lot of movement, tempo changes, and think where that song starts and where it ends. But it all flows, it all feels natural. It doesn't feel, you're not sitting there like, when is this going to end? It just all makes sense. In some ways, you're anticipating the next section because it's like, oh man, here comes that next part that's really, really cool. And it's just full of that. It flows really, really well. And the beginning riff it's up there with Smoke on the Water and as one of the most iconic
very
guitar
simple
riffs of all time. Yeah, exactly. It's all about the tone and Iommi's feel and just the way he plays it.
What's another thing that's cool about that is that it ends the way, as far as the guitar riff goes, he's playing that same chord that he starts off with. It might be in a different key, but the band, rather than Bill Ward just kicking the bass drum, he's playing the toms, and then Geezer's riffing on the bass. The tempo is like the tempo behind the guitar riff or the guitar part is very similar to what he's doing in the beginning, but the rhythm track is different, and that adds really interesting, kind of brings the beginning to the end, but yet the band is wrapping it up in a finale sort of a way. It's kind of an interesting development from the beginning to the end, with one thing sort of being a constant or being a repetitive part, but the band, reacting to basically the way that the song took that little journey from the beginning into where they are at the end. That's
Absolutely, yeah. It's brilliant for sure.
Yeah.
All right, and then Electric Funeral, right? We're on side 2 now.
Yep.
And that heavy riff at the beginning, this was another one that I hadn't heard till I got the album, and that wah-wah pedal sound on his guitar. It's just such a doomy sounding riff, man. It's just awesome the way that song kicks in, and the Ozzy's lyrics and the doomsday sort of lyrics of it. It's just a great doom song.
Yeah, it definitely is. Before there was doom, really.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounded like a dirge. It sounded like a funeral dirge, an electric funeral. Hey, it's exactly what it was. It was just really black, dark, and of course another form of protest song, talking about the atomic bomb. In graphic detail, eyes melting to blood. It's pretty gory, but I guess that was the point. I mean, the point was to talk about, in a protest form, the horrors of what could happen if there was an atomic bomb dropped. And it was something that they were thinking could be a reality at any time. So, I mean, it was a song that was relevant. Lyrically.
Yeah, the lyrics are great. And I always loved when they did the Reunion live album. the version on that, Ozzy does this thing whenever that main riff comes back in the boom, boom, ba-da-da. Ozzy does this thing. It sounds like he's saying heavy, ba-da, ba-da-da, heavy, which I just think is just awesome. And it's just a great song. And I love when it kicks into the fast, that frantic part. We talked a little bit about it earlier. The
That is so
da-da-da,
cool.
da-ga-ga-ga. Yeah, and the end, I love the voice at the end, that electric funeral, electric funeral. The way he sings that down really low is just, and then it slows. But again, here's that Black Sabbath thing again. That gear change is going super frantic, super fast, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden, Bill does that drum fill to slow it down and bring it back into the main riff, and it's
yeah,
just so crushing and so heavy,
it's
man. It's
amazing.
just great.
Well, what's really cool is that beat that Bill's doing during that dan 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 is right along with the guitar riff. He's playing. He's not just keeping the tempo. He's not just keeping a beat. He's playing that guitar part with multiple hits on the snare, working off of his ride. It's a really interesting beat. If you ever listen to that, like just focus in on what he's playing, because at least one time or another, if not a few times, we've tried to play that song and uh, a few different times, and you got to listen to what he's doing, because it's not just it's really unorthodox. I mean, he's playing right along with that riff, and it's something that's completely just like really free form. Really got to give him a lot of credit for that, because I mean that's just thinking outside the box. Just Bill always says he was a reactionary drummer, never took a lesson, watched a lot of drummers, had the opportunity to watch drummers like Jim Capaldi from Traffic, Clive Bunker and Jethro Tull, two great drummers right there, especially Clive Bunker. Also another jazz-driven drummer that was in rock, Jethro Tull. But really, really an outside-the-box thinker, a complete pioneer, I think, Bill Ward, especially on this album, just really reacting to the music, feeling it and expressing it through the drums. And that part in particular, I think, is one of his best moments in his career. Actually, I think. And there's a lot of them, but that's up there for me.
The way Bill always referred to himself as, like you said, a reactionary drummer or an orchestral style drummer, where he would listen to Iommi's riffs and basses instead of just playing a standard drum pattern underneath them. He played along with
Yeah,
Iommi, which I think is perfectly illustrated
yeah.
in that song.
And that's another similarity he shares with John Bonham. John Bonham, one of the things that made him such a great drummer, not only because of his outside the box type of drum patterns, but also that John Bonham played with Jimmy Page. He played with the guitar riff. Bill Ward does the same thing, and then somewhere in between Bill and Tony is Geezer, balancing both things perfectly. But what makes Bill so cool and so interesting to listen to is how he reacts to the music, in particular the guitar.
For sure. And then Hand of Doom starts off with the ominous Geezer bass line, and then another sort of swingy, jazzy part from Bill underneath that, where he's playing on the rims of his drums and
Yep, shots.
the rim shot thing, and this sort of creepy Ozzy lyrics. Ozzy comes in with that sort of mid-range style voice, and this has kind of a similar arrangement, sort of as Electric Funeral. It gets fast in the middle, and then it drops back down. Another cool song.
Yeah. Again, it was a kind of a topical bit of a protest. I mean, there's a lot of a lot of drug imagery, a lot of and not in a very favorable light. Talking about heroin, which was basically, and the way I heard it explained, I think it was Geezer that was talking about it on a documentary that was behind the music or that classic album thing. I don't know. I've been kind of delving into the background of Paranoid over the last week or so, but explained that, you know, a lot of the soldiers were coming back while they were over in Vietnam, were doing heroin, and they were coming back from the war hooked on heroin, and what a horrible reality that they were living, you know, not only having to deal with the experiences of that war and things that no one should ever have to experience, but in conjunction with that, now also being addicted to heroin. What a horrible place that put these people in. And that was basically the theme of Hand of Doom. Hand of Doom, I think, was the actual like syringe going into the vein uh, with the drugs that were, you know, being a place that enabled these soldiers to be able to cope with their surroundings. It's really unfortunate and very, very grim song, but it all works. And in spite of its grimness, it's a really enjoyable song to listen to.
Mhm.
Musical movements are really interesting, and the lyrics is, you know, as brutal as they are, you know, very poetic and you know, really interesting, to take that something dark and make something very creative and artistic from it.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. All right. Next, the instrumental Rat Salad. We
Rat Salad.
talked about this one earlier. This was another one where I hadn't heard before I got the album, and then it's a cool. It's like we mentioned earlier. It's Bill Ward's Moby Dick or Ginger. It's like Ginger Baker's Toad or something. This
Yeah.
was something back then that was kind of common for drummers to have a drum solo on an album. I think Clive Bunker does one. I think in one of the Jethro Tull
Dharma
albums.
for one, I think.
Yeah, Dharma for one, right? So this was a pretty common thing for for drummers to do back then, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's cool. I
Yeah, it's
always
really
love the
cool.
guitar solo in it too when it goes in. That's another one where it has sort of like a funky, jazzy feel to it, and Iommi does that really cool lead, and Geezer's jamming out underneath them. It's
the two parts, the guitar. Well, of course, there's the place where Bill just goes off and does his improv drum solo, but the way that there's also that the part of the song where it's rooted in the guitar and drums and they augment one another, really cool. Almost kind of a big band thing. I know that Bill was also influenced by Gene Krupa and some of the big band drummers, which, you know, at that time they weren't too far removed chronologically from that big band era, and those drummers were, you know, hugely influential to the contemporary rock drummers. And
yeah,
you can hear a lot of that in Rat Salad. It was kind of a big band, very showcasing drums thing going on. But what's really cool about it to me is that he just keeps plugging along, man, and it sounds like he's gonna it sounds like he's gonna crash and burn at any minute, but he doesn't. You know, it's not. You can just hear that it's improvised, and he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just going with the moment, going with the flow, and that's what makes it so cool. Technically, it's not, you know, it's not great drumming, but that depends on, you know, what your criteria is. If great to you is, you know, expressive and creative, then it's great. If it's, you know, schooled and disciplined and polished, well, then it's not great. But it's 100% Bill Ward, and it fits perfectly on the album, and I love it.
and I always loved two things. I love in the beginning when it does a ba-da, ba-da, and then there's a little guitar feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he does the ba-da, 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 and the guitar keeps going up, and the bass falls it for a little bit, but then the bass breaks off and goes down on the riff while the guitar keeps going up, and it's just super cool. And then it busts into that sort of jazzy fusion. guitar solo, do 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 do, and that's just super cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I'm thinking about this album as a whole now because we're almost at the end. We have one more song, but at this stage, I'm looking back on all the songs that we've discussed, and I'm thinking this is such an original sounding album. I can't think of any song in contemporary rock music at that time that sounds like any of these songs that we've just described, with the possible exception of Paranoid. Paranoid kind of has a communication breakdown vibe to it, but everything else, man, it just sounds like this is the band playing together, exploring, their abilities, being inspired by what they're hearing. They're listening to each other, is reacting to one another, and I think that really comes across in this album very effectively. Probably, maybe more so than any other album that I'm familiar with, as far as an actual band playing live in a studio. And when you get right down to it, isn't that what a record's supposed to be? It's supposed to be a recording of a band playing live, and this is what this sounds like. But from the songwriting, from the songcraft aspect of it, really creative. I can't think of any other bands that were doing this sort of thing at this time.
No, nobody was as heavy as this, and then
Yeah.
the variety within the sound. You've got this as an instrumental, Planet Caravan, the different feels and the different things going on. It's just the album flows very well. Every song is kind of its own little island unto itself in some ways. So yeah, it works great. And even Rat Salad, even though you might say, well, this is, I wouldn't say filler, but yeah, it's not a song that they played live for years and years and years after that. It's more of an in studio jam type of thing, but it's still cool, and it's
very cool. Yeah,
it still works, and
it still carries over that vibe of the first album, where it sounds like they're playing a live set. This is part of that. This is like the section where the band would, in a live setting, might go off stage and take a break and let the drummer fill up 5 or 10 minutes while they take a breather. That's sort of this part of the album. The album is like a live show.
This is probably the only song on the record to me that I could see being on the first album because of what you just said. It does sound like something they might have done in their live set, and it was a chance for Bill to have a drum solo, and it didn't get used on the first album and got carried over onto Paranoid. But they keep it nice and compact. It's not, I don't know how long it is, but I don't think it's
like 5 minutes. Something like that.
So it goes by quickly. It doesn't feel like it's them trying to fill up space on the album or something. It just sounds like something different that they wanted to put on the record, and where it's placed on the record, it works.
Yeah, it definitely does.
All right, and then we've got Jack the Stripper, Fairies Wear Boots, to take the album out. Another one that has a lot of different changes to it, yet they all work, they all flow. And another one with a whole bunch of signature Iommi guitar riffs within his solos, if you will. His song starts off with a guitar solo, but it's one of those guitar solos that you could sing along to. It's an integral part of the song, and the rhythm section is just jamming and swinging on it. And Ozzy's lyrics are cool, and it's an awesome way to take the record out.
Second favorite song on Paranoid is Fairies Wear Boots. First is the title track. This is the second, maybe even a tie on some days. It just goes from one cool riff to the next. Starts off cool, and it's like, wow, that's a really cool riff. Then the next riff comes in, like, well, that's really cool. That's even cooler. And then you get into third and fourth riffs, and it's just wow. I mean, it's just building on. It just keeps going upward. It just gets cooler and cooler. But let's talk about some of these alternate and additional song titles that were part of this album. Jack the Stripper. I recently saw that mentioned as that was designated to be the opening passage.
Yeah.
So, okay. And they and War Pigs. There's
Luke's
Luke's
Wall.
Wall. What is that? Do you have any idea what
That's
Luke's
tagged
Wall
on
is?
after that. The way that one is written, it's War Pigs / Luke's Wall. So I always took that to be the bo da do da do da do da do da dun dun dun.
Yeah.
Just sort
Okay.
of the end of the last 2 minutes of the song or whatever. I always took that to mean that that's what that was supposed to be. And Jack the Stripper is listed before Fairies Wear Boots, so I always assumed it was sort of the jamming part at the
Yeah.
beginning of
Yeah.
Fairies Wear Boots. Yeah, which is funny because again, when I going back to where this all started, I was mentioning I heard some of the songs on the radio, and I had seen the song titles, and I was in my mind. I just remembered this when you brought this up. I was thinking that those were, oh wow, there's a song called Jack the Stripper. There's a song called Luke's Wall. And I even remember calling a college radio station before I had gotten the album, and I already had taped War Pigs, Paranoid, Iron Man. And I remember asking the guy at the radio station, can you play Jack the Stripper or Luke's Wall, and trying to get him to play the other songs on the album so I
Uh-huh.
could record them. And I think it was that guy that told me, it's not an actual song. It's part of Fairies Wear Boots. If you've heard Fairies Wear Boots,
It's interpolating. Yeah.
right. And me as a kid, I was so embarrassed. I was like, this teenage college metalhead had to
Yeah.
school me.
But it made it more interesting. Like it was like this whole concept, and it's sort of like one of those things where a lot of progressive rock bands were doing this too. Yes, and Genesis, where they have one long song that was built on several different movements. 17-minute. That might be too long. Maybe on average for about 8 or 9 minutes, different movements within an 8 or 9 minute song, and having little subsets like the main song title as track 3, and then A, B, C, D, and then underneath D, Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3. That sort of
It's
thing.
like a math equation.
Yeah, it's like, what is all that about? But it's interesting. I guess it just sort of part of the song craft where let's label every different movement its own title, and I guess that's sort of what that applies to.
And this
But they
is
use the
this,
word.
yeah.
They use the word interpolating. Is that how you pronounce it? Interpolating. I don't think
So,
I've ever heard the word prior to that, and I don't think I've heard the word used after that. But maybe I'm not as well read as I should be. But interpolating is something that I only associate with Black Sabbath.
yeah, it's true.
Interpolating.
It's true.
Yeah.
And this song has another Bill Ward setting up the new tempo thing. When they come out of the beginning part, he does a da 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 bo da do ba bo ba bo ba.
Yeah, such a
He
great
sets it up,
swing
and
on that. Yeah, he really.
I
I love.
love. Yeah, God.
I love when Bill Ward swings, man, because he just really, you can just see that he puts his back in it, man. You can feel it, when you're listening to, like, especially, oh man, he swings a lot, but especially on Fairies Wear Boots, you can
Yeah,
almost, when you're listening to it, you can almost hear the wind coming off his arms. He's just
absolutely. And
hot,
it's
and bringing him high, raising him high and bringing him down with the utmost confidence.
and I love the way the song ends, the way it just sort of fades out on the da do da do da do da do da
Oh
do
yeah,
da do
yeah.
da do da do. It's kind of a. I'm trying to think. Is there any other song that fades out on the record? I don't think so. I think this is the only song that fades out on the record, and it's just kind of a cool way to take the record out.
Yeah, I'm not a real big fan of fade outs, especially in the first 3 songs. I guess at the last song on each side, it's cool, but yeah, I think you're right. This is the only song that has a fade out, and it's pretty cool that it's at the very last song on the album, "Fairies Wear Boots." So, and it's sort of like, the thing with a fade out is you're really not ending the song. For all intents and purposes, the song could be playing to infinity. That's sort of the illusion that you're creating. We're not really ending it. It's just sort of trailing off and it could go on for another 5 minutes, or it could go on who knows how long.
To be continued.
Yeah, exactly, and that's kind of an interesting way to end the album. And then, of course, when we move on to the next chapter, Master of Reality, that follows, Berries Wear Boots, Sweet Leaf, pretty cool. And it wasn't
Absolutely.
intentional before, but, looking at it in retrospect, it works. So, yeah,
Indeed.
Paranoid. Wow, what an amazing album.
Yep.
This is probably the one that I really wanted to get into. It made a huge impact on me, and I know it did you too. So this is a pretty important one for us to discuss.
Yeah, it's the one that started it for me. It's near and dear to my heart. Still to this day, it's one of the first heaviest albums that I had at that time. Just coming off Kiss and AC/DC, this was something different, and this really set me off into the direction of heavy metal. So it for sure, it's a milestone album for Black Sabbath. It's a milestone album in my metal life.
Yep, same here. One thing I'm going to say, before we end the segment, is that when I first heard this album, of course, it was definitely heard the heavy guitars. It was a heavy metal album, but there was a part of it that sounded very deep into 70s. It had I don't want to say dated, because that's sort of a bad way to describe it, but it had a very historical sound to it in where it was in 70s rock, and you could still hear that, and that's one of the things that really makes it cool. At the time when I was discovering a lot of other things, like you mentioned, AC/DC, what else was I listening to? Getting into like Judas Priest, UFO, what have you. This was one of the albums that sounded like it was definitely a product of the time that it was released. Studio sound, especially with Planet Caravan, that sounded very, very 70s. Iron Man, not so much. Paranoid, the song, not so much. But overall, there was sort of a production quality that kind of set it in that time that it was released. It was a very early 70s sounding album.
Yeah, the jamming and everything on it,
Yeah.
the improvisation elements, and yeah, it definitely has that's how bands used to do things back then.
Yeah. Then it's really cool. But this is probably the last album that really has that sound, because as we move forward from this point on, that starts to diminish a little bit and moves into just, well, I mean, every Black Sabbath album is different, but I think looking over the classic era, the Ozzy era, I think the first album and this album are probably most closely related to one another than anything after this, as it would follow an album, like, say, for Master of Reality doesn't quite have the association with Volume 4 as the first album and Paranoid does. I think the first two albums are almost like, Paranoid is almost like a sequel to the first album, and the rest of them not so much.
I agree.
It's an observation.
Yes. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for our discussion of the iconic album Paranoid.
Yep.
Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. We thank you for listening. Make sure you visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast. Leave us a comment there, what you thought of the episode. What are your thoughts on the Paranoid album? We'd love to hear them. So thanks again for listening, and we will see you next time.
Right.